The stars looked different when you knew they might be the last ones you would ever see as a free human being. Lisa Martinez stood at the observation deck of the TFS Valiant, watching the distant lights that marked the edge of human space. 22. Years of war had taught her to appreciate these quiet moments between battles. She had lost count of how many friends had died in those years, how many ships had been destroyed, how many colonies had been evacuated or worse. The communication from Earth had arrived 3 days ago. Peace talks. The words felt strange in her mind. After more than 2 decades of fighting the Zephyrian Empire, the idea of sitting down at a table with them seemed almost impossible. But the war had to end somehow. Both sides were bleeding resources, and lives at a rate that could not continue forever. Captain Martinez had been selected as one of the human delegates. She was not sure why. Her reputation was built on combat victories, not diplomatic skills. She had never been good with words, preferring actions that spoke louder than any speech. But Admiral Parker had insisted she be part of the team. He said they needed someone who understood the real cost of war, someone who had seen what the Zephyrians were capable of up close. The Zephyrians were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They were tall beings made of what looked like living crystal, with bodies that shifted between different colors depending on their mood. Their technology was far advanced beyond human capabilities. They had ruled their part of the galaxy for thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. When humanity had first expanded beyond Earth, they had stumbled into Zephyrian space almost by accident. The first contact had gone badly. The Zephyrians saw humans as primitive newcomers, who had no right to claim territory among the stars. They demanded that humanity return to their home system and never leave again. When human leaders refused, the war began. It had been a brutal conflict from the start. The Zephyrians had better weapons, better shields, and better ships. But humans had something else. They had the stubborn refusal to give up, even when facing impossible odds. Lisa remembered her first battle with the Zephyrians. She had been a young officer then, serving on a destroyer that was part of a fleet sent to protect the colony on New Boston. The Zephyrian ships had appeared without warning, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the light of the system's star. They had demanded the immediate surrender of the colony. When the humans refused, the Zephyrians had opened fire. The battle had lasted 6 hours. By the end, half the human fleet was destroyed or badly damaged, but they had held the line. The colony was saved, at least for that day. Lisa had learned something important in that battle. The Zephyrians expected humans to run when faced with superior force. When humans stood and fought instead, it confused them. That confusion could be used as a weapon. Now, years later, Lisa commanded her own ship. The Valiant was a heavy cruiser, one of the newest designs in the human fleet. It was built specifically to fight Zephyrians with thick armor and powerful weapons. But even the best human ships were outmatched by Zephyrian technology. Victory came through clever tactics, sacrifice, and the willingness to take risks that no sane species would attempt. The door to the observation deck opened behind her. She turned to see Commander Jake Roberts, her first officer. He was a good man, steady and reliable. He had been with her for 3 years, through some of the worst battles of the war. Like her, he had mixed feelings about the peace talks. "The transport is ready, Captain," he said. "Admiral Parker wants to depart within the hour." Lisa nodded. She had been dreading this moment. Leaving her ship felt like abandoning her post. The Valiant was more than just a vessel to her. It was home, and her crew was family. But orders were orders, and perhaps this diplomatic mission would accomplish something that years of fighting had not. "Take good care of her while I'm gone," she said. "Always do, Captain, but I hope you'll be back soon." "The crew doesn't like it when you're away too long," Lisa smiled. It was true. She had earned the loyalty of her crew through shared hardship and countless battles. They trusted her to bring them home, and she had never let them down. But this mission was different. She would not be fighting an enemy she could see and understand. Instead, she would be sitting across a table from beings who viewed humanity as nothing more than an annoyance to be eliminated. The transport ship was small but fast. It carried the human delegation to the neutral world where the peace talks would take place. Kepler 442b was a cold, airless rock that belonged to neither side. A temporary station had been built there, with facilities for both human and Zephyrian delegates. The trip took 2 days, giving Lisa time to study the files. On her fellow negotiators, Admiral Parker was the lead delegate. He was an older man, tired from years of war. He had lost his own son in the Battle of Proxima, and Lisa could see the weight of that loss in his eyes. Dr. Helen Brooks was the team's expert on Zephyrian language and culture. She had spent years studying their communications, trying to understand how they thought. The other delegates were a mix of military officers and civilian officials, all chosen for their expertise in different areas. When they arrived at the station, Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. The Zephyrian ships were already there, their crystalline hulls reflecting the distant sun. They were beautiful in their own way. But Lisa had seen too many human ships destroyed by those same vessels to appreciate their beauty. The first meeting was scheduled for the next day. Lisa spent the evening reviewing intelligence reports and trying to prepare herself for what was to come. She had faced death many times in battle, but somehow the thought of sitting across from the enemy without weapons felt more terrifying than any space battle. The negotiation room was simple and functional. Human furniture on one side, Zephyrian crystal formations on the other. When the Zephyrians entered, Lisa felt her hand instinctively move toward where her sidearm would normally be. But this was a diplomatic mission. Weapons were not allowed. High Counselor Vexthara led the Zephyrian delegation. She was tall even by Zephyrian standards, her crystal body shifting between deep blue and purple colors. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority accumulated over centuries. She looked at the humans with what Lisa could only describe as mild contempt. As if they were children who had wandered into an adult conversation, the talks began with formal statements from both sides. Admiral Parker spoke of humanity's desire for peace and their willingness to find a reasonable solution to the conflict. High Counselor Vexthara responded with words about the necessity of order and the proper place of younger species in the galaxy. From the very beginning, Lisa could tell that the Zephyrians did not see humans as equals. They saw them as a problem to be solved. A second day of talks brought no improvement. Lisa sat in her designated chair, watching the Zephyrians speak about humanity with barely hidden disgust. They used terms like the young ones and the crude species when they thought the translators were not working properly. Every gesture and word made it clear that they saw humans as nothing more than an annoying pest that needed to be controlled. Dr. Helen Brooks worked harder than anyone else in the room. She checked every translation, questioned every phrase, and tried to build bridges between the two species. But even she was starting to show signs of frustration. The Zephyrian translator, a being called Kethver, seemed to enjoy making human statements sound more aggressive than they actually were. When Admiral Parker spoke of human achievements, Kethver translated as boasting about primitive accomplishments. When Dr. Brooks mentioned human art and literature, it became crude entertainment for simple minds. Lisa found herself studying the Zephyrians more closely with each passing hour. Their crystal bodies changed color based on their emotions, and she was beginning to understand the patterns. Deep blue meant calm authority, purple showed mild amusement, and red indicated anger or contempt. Right now, most of the Zephyrian delegation was showing various shades of purple. They were amused by the entire situation. On the third day, something changed. Lisa had always been good at reading people, and her years of combat had taught her to notice small details that others might miss. She began to see things that worried her. The Zephyrians were too confident, too relaxed. They acted like beings who already knew how the story would end. During a break in the discussions, Lisa decided to explore the station. She told herself it was just restlessness, but really she was looking for something. She did not know what, but her instincts told her that something was wrong. The station was supposed to be neutral territory, but Lisa had learned to trust her gut feelings about danger. She found what she was looking for in a maintenance corridor near the communication array. Hidden behind a false panel was a small device that she recognized from intelligence briefings. It was a Zephyrian listening device designed to intercept human communications. Lisa felt her blood run cold. The Zephyrians had been spying on the human delegation from the moment they arrived. Lisa carefully removed the device and took it back to her quarters. She used her military communication gear to scan it, and what she found made her stomach turn. The device had been recording everything. Every private conversation between the human delegates, every message sent back to Earth, every strategic discussion had been monitored by the Zephyrians, but that was not the worst part. The device also contained stored messages from the Zephyrian command. Lisa's translation software was basic, but it was enough to understand the main points. The Zephyrians had no intention of making a real peace. The entire negotiation was a delaying tactic while they positioned their main fleet for a final assault on human space. The attack was planned for the moment the peace talks ended. While the human leadership was distracted by diplomacy, the Zephyrian fleet would strike at the core human worlds. The plan was to destroy Earth's defenses and force a complete surrender. Any humans who survived would be relocated to prison colonies, where they could be watched and controlled. Lisa sat in her quarters, staring at the evidence of Zephyrian treachery. She knew she had to tell Admiral Parker immediately, but she also knew what his reaction would be. The Admiral was a good man, but he was tired. He wanted the war to end, and he might convince himself that even a bad peace was better than continued fighting. She thought about the other delegates. Most of them were civilians who had never seen real combat. They did not understand what the Zephyrians were capable of. They had come to the talks hoping for a reasonable solution, not realizing that their enemies saw them as animals to be caged. Lisa made her decision. She would tell Admiral Parker about the listening device, but she would also prepare for the worst. If the peace talks failed, humanity would need to be ready for the final battle. She sent a coded message to Commander Roberts on the Valiant, using an old military encryption that the Zephyrians were unlikely to break. The message was simple: be ready for anything. The next morning, Lisa presented her findings to Admiral Parker in private. She showed him the listening device and explained what she had learned about the Zephyrian attack plans. The Admiral's face went pale as he realized the implications. "Are you certain about this, Captain?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "The intelligence is solid. They never intended to negotiate in good faith." Admiral Parker was quiet for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "We'll continue with the talks anyway. Maybe we can still find a way to avoid the worst outcome." Lisa wanted to argue, but she held her tongue. The Admiral was her superior officer, and she had presented the facts. What he did with that information was his decision to make. The talks continued, but now Lisa watched everything with new eyes. She saw how the Zephyrians smiled when they thought no one was looking. She noticed how they became more relaxed as the days passed, as if they were watching a play where they already knew the ending. Most disturbing of all, she saw how the human delegates were beginning to accept the Zephyrian terms. The terms were harsh. Humanity would be required to abandon half of their colonies and return to a much smaller area of space. All human military forces would be reduced to a size that the Zephyrians deemed appropriate. Human technology development would be monitored and controlled. In exchange, the Zephyrians promised to allow humanity to survive as a protected species. Dr. Brooks tried to negotiate better terms, but the Zephyrians were firm. They made it clear that these were their final conditions. Humanity could accept them or face complete destruction. There would be no middle ground. Lisa watched Admiral Parker during these discussions, and she could see the weight of responsibility crushing him. He was thinking about the billions of humans who would die if the war continued. He was remembering his own son and all the other young people who had already been lost. The idea of saving what remained of humanity, even at the cost of freedom, was becoming more attractive with each passing day. On the fifth day, something happened that changed everything. Lisa was walking through the station's common area when she encountered a young Zephyrian. The being was smaller than the others, with a crystal body that shifted between soft green and blue colors. It was clearly nervous about something. "You are the human warrior," the young Zephyrian said in halting English. Lisa was surprised. None of the Zephyrians had spoken to her directly before. "I am Captain Martinez," she replied. "I have heard stories about you, about your battles. About how you never surrender?" Lisa did not know how to respond. She studied the young being, trying to understand what it wanted. "My name is Zexai. I'm what you would call a student. I study your species. And what have you learned?" "That you are not what my elders say you are. You are not crude or primitive. You are ... different. You do things that make no sense to us, but somehow they work." Lisa felt a spark of curiosity. "What kind of things?" "You fight battles you cannot win. You sacrifice yourselves for others. You refuse to accept defeat even when it is logical to do so. My elders think this makes you stupid, but I think it makes you dangerous." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Kethver, the Zephyrian translator. He spoke harshly to the young being in their own language, and Zexai quickly moved away. But not before giving Lisa a look that seemed to say something important. That night, Lisa lay in her quarters thinking about the conversation. The young Zephyrian had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their military tactics. It was their refusal to give up. Even when giving up was the smart thing to do, she thought about all the times in human history when people had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. She thought about her own battles, about the times when victory had seemed impossible, but humans had found a way to win. Maybe that was what the galaxy needed to remember about humanity. The next morning brought darker news. Admiral Parker had received updated intelligence from Earth during the night. The Zephyrian fleet movements confirmed what Lisa had discovered. 3 major battle groups were positioning themselves near human space, ready to strike at key worlds. The timing matched perfectly with the end of the peace talks. Lisa found herself walking the corridors of the station, unable to sleep or rest. She passed by the quarters of the other delegates and could hear hushed conversations through the walls. Fear was spreading through the human team. They were beginning to understand that they might be witnessing the final days of human freedom. She made her way to the observation deck, where she had spent so many hours thinking during the talks. The stars looked the same as always, but now she wondered how many of them would soon be lighting the wreckage of human ships. The thought made her chest tight with anger and sadness. Dr. Brooks found her there an hour later. The older woman looked exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had been working around the clock, trying to find some way to make the negotiations work. "I've been studying their language for 10 years, Dr. Brooks said, joining Lisa at the observation window. "I thought I understood them. I thought we could find common ground. What changed your mind?" Lisa asked. "I finally realized that they don't see us as people. To them, we're just animals that learn to use tools. They're not negotiating with us. They're deciding what to do with us." Lisa nodded. She had come to the same conclusion days ago. "So what do we do?" "I don't know," Dr. Brooks admitted. "The Admiral is considering accepting their terms. He thinks it's better than extinction." "Is it?" Dr. Brooks was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think so, but now I'm not sure. What kind of life would we have under Zephyrian rule? Would our children even remember what it meant to be human?" Lisa had been asking herself the same questions. She thought about the young Zephyrian who had spoken to her, about his curiosity and his recognition that humans were different, that difference was what made humanity special. It was what had allowed them to survive and thrive despite their limitations. "I need to show you something," Lisa said. She led Dr. Brooks back to her quarters and showed her the listening device and the intercepted messages. Dr. Brooks' face went pale as she read the translation. "They're planning to attack no matter what we decide," Dr. Brooks said. "The talks are just a distraction. They want our leaders focused on diplomacy while they prepare for the final assault." Dr. Brooks sank into a chair, looking defeated. "Then it's over." Even if we reject their terms, they'll destroy us anyway. Maybe, Lisa said, but at least we'll go down fighting. That afternoon, Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She could not sit quietly while her species was betrayed and destroyed. She began reaching out to the other delegates, sharing what she had learned and asking them to remember what they were really fighting for. She started with the military officers, who were easier to convince. Colonel Pete Johnson had lost his entire unit in the Battle of Titan. Major Kate Williams had seen her home colony evacuated when the Zephyrians attacked. They understood what surrender would really mean. The civilian delegates were harder to reach. They had not seen combat firsthand, and they were focused on the practical problems of survival. But Lisa found ways to connect with them too. She reminded them of their families, their dreams, their hopes for the future. She asked them to imagine explaining to their children why they had chosen slavery over freedom. By evening, Lisa had spoken to most of the human delegation. She had not convinced everyone, but she had planted seeds of doubt about the wisdom of surrender. People were beginning to ask hard questions about what kind of future they were accepting. The breakthrough came when Dr. Brooks made a discovery in the Zephyrian language files. Hidden in their formal diplomatic language were references to cleansing and purification that took on a sinister meaning when properly translated. The Zephyrians were not just planning to control humanity. They were planning to eliminate human culture, human history, and human identity. They want to keep us alive, but they want to kill everything that makes us human, Dr. Brooks explained to the group. Our art, our literature, our music, our way of thinking. They see these things as corruptions that need to be removed. Lisa felt a cold fury building inside her. She had been prepared to fight for human territory and human lives. But the idea of losing human souls was something else entirely. It was a violation so complete that it made death seem like a mercy. She spent the night walking the station's corridors, thinking about everything she had learned. The other delegates were doing the same, having their own private struggles with the impossible choice they faced. Some were still leaning toward acceptance, believing that any survival was better than extinction. Others were beginning to share Lisa's conviction that some things were worth dying for. The next morning brought the final session of the peace talks. High Counselor Vexthara presented the Zephyrian terms one last time, making it clear that this was humanity's final chance to accept them. The terms had actually gotten worse overnight. As if the Zephyrians sensed human weakness and were pressing their advantage, Admiral Parker stood to address the human delegation. Lisa watched his face and saw the weight of command crushing him. He spoke about the terrible cost of war, about the millions who had already died, about the billions who would die if the fighting continued. His voice carried the pain of a man who had seen too much death and destruction. "We have to think about the future," he said. "We have to think about what kind of world we want to leave for the next generation. Maybe survival is more important than pride." One by one, the other delegates began to speak. Most echoed the Admiral's words, talking about the need for practical solutions and the importance of keeping humanity alive. Even Dr. Brooks, despite her discoveries about Zephyrian intentions, spoke in favor of accepting the terms. Lisa listened to each speech with growing alarm. These were good people, intelligent people, but they were making the same mistake that had doomed other species throughout history. They were choosing the safety of the moment over the freedom of the future. The formal vote was about to begin. Admiral Parker asked each delegate to state their position clearly. The military officers were split, with some supporting acceptance and others favoring continued resistance. The civilian delegates were mostly in favor of surrender, seeing it as the only way to prevent total destruction. Lisa's turn came near the end. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. Everyone in the room was watching her, waiting to see which way she would vote. She thought about her crew on the Valiant, about the young Zephyrian who had recognized something special in humanity, about all the humans who had died believing they were fighting for something important. "I've been thinking about what makes us human," she said. "It's not our technology or our cities or our ships. It's our refusal to give up, even when giving up makes sense. It's our willingness to fight for something bigger than ourselves. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of her fellow delegates. If we accept these terms, we're not saving humanity. We're just keeping human bodies alive while we kill the human spirit. I can't do that. I won't do that. The room was silent. Lisa had spoken clearly and firmly, but she was still just one voice among many. The vote continued, and it became clear that the majority favored acceptance. Admiral Parker began to make the final count, preparing to announce humanity's surrender. That was when Lisa realized that the vote itself was not the real decision. The real decision was what each person chose to believe about themselves and their species. The vote was just a formality, a way of making the surrender seem official and democratic, but some choices could not be made by committee. Some decisions required individual courage, even when that courage seemed foolish or hopeless. Lisa had spent her entire career learning that lesson in battle after battle. Now she was about to learn it in a much more important context. The Zephyrians were already celebrating. Their crystal bodies were shifting to bright colors of satisfaction and victory. They had succeeded in convincing humanity to surrender without firing a shot. It was a perfect victory, achieved through patience and superior intellect. High Counselor Vexthara began to speak about the implementation of the new order. She talked about the practical steps that would be taken to ensure human compliance with Zephyrian authority. She spoke as if the decision had already been made and there was nothing left to discuss. Lisa felt something building inside her, a combination of anger and determination that she had felt before in the heat of battle. But this was different. This was not about winning or losing a fight. This was about deciding what kind of species humanity would be. Admiral Parker's voice shook slightly as he prepared to make the final announcement. The vote had been close but clear enough. The human delegation had chosen to accept the Zephyrian terms. Lisa watched his face and saw a man who was about to carry the weight of his species' surrender for the rest of his life. The human delegation has reached a decision, Admiral Parker began. After careful consideration of all options, we have voted to accept the terms offered by the Zephyrian Empire. High Counselor Vexthara's crystal body shifted to a brilliant gold color, indicating triumph and satisfaction. The other Zephyrians in the room began to make sounds that Lisa had learned were expressions of approval. They had achieved victory without losing a single ship or soldier. This is a wise decision, Vexthara said. The younger species has shown that it can learn from its betters. The transition to proper order will begin immediately. Lisa felt something breaking inside her chest. Not her heart, but something deeper. It was the feeling of watching everything she had fought for disappear. In a single moment. All the battles, all the sacrifices, all the deaths had led to this quiet surrender in a conference room. She thought about Commander Roberts and the crew of the Valiant, waiting for orders that would never come. She thought about the colonies that would be abandoned, the families that would be separated, the children who would grow up as subjects instead of citizens. She thought about the young Zephyrian who had recognized something special in humanity, and wondered if that recognition would survive what was about to happen. Dr. Brooks was crying quietly, her hands covering her face. Colonel Johnson sat with his head down, unable to look at anyone. Major Williams was staring at the table, her jaw clenched tight. Even those who had voted for acceptance looked sick with the reality of what they had done. The implementation will proceed in phases, Vexthara continued. First, all human military forces will be reduced to acceptable levels. Second, the designated colonies will be evacuated. Third, human education and cultural programs will be modified to ensure compatibility with galactic order. Lisa barely heard the words. She was thinking about something else, something that had been growing in her mind for days. It was the memory of every human who had ever faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. Soldiers who had charged into certain death to save their comrades. Civilians who had stood up to tyrants despite knowing the cost. Ordinary people who had done extraordinary things simply because they believed it was right. The first phase will begin within 30 days, Vexthara said. Human fleet commanders will receive specific instructions about which ships are to be decommissioned and which personnel are to be reassigned. That was when Lisa felt it. The same feeling she had experienced in her first battle against the Zephyrians, when she had realized that the enemy expected humans to run. The same feeling she had felt a dozen times since then, when victory seemed impossible, but she had found a way to win anyway. It was the feeling of knowing that sometimes the only choice was to stand and fight, regardless of the odds. There will be no resistance to these measures, Vexthara continued. Any human who attempts to interfere with the implementation will be dealt with harshly. Lisa's hands were gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was thinking about her ancestors, about all the humans who had faced moments like this throughout history. She was thinking about the people who had said no to kings and emperors, who had chosen freedom over safety, who had died rather than bow to tyranny. The Zephyrian Empire has been generous in its terms, Vexthara said. Humanity will be allowed to survive and even prosper as long as it accepts its proper place in the galactic order. Lisa felt the weight of history pressing down on her. She thought about the American Revolution, when a small group of colonists had decided to fight the most powerful empire in the world. She thought about the abolitionists who had risked everything to end slavery. She thought about the resistance fighters who had opposed fascism even when defeat seemed certain. This concludes the formal negotiations, Vexthara announced. The human delegation will return to Earth to begin the implementation process. The Zephyrian Empire looks forward to a long and peaceful relationship with humanity. Admiral Parker stood up slowly, his face gray with exhaustion and defeat. On behalf of the human species, I accept these terms, he said. We will cooperate fully with the implementation. Lisa felt something snap inside her. Not break, but snap back into place like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. She thought about her crew, about the young people who had trusted her to lead them through the darkness of war. She thought about the children who would grow up in a world where humanity had chosen safety over freedom. But most of all, she thought about the question that had been haunting her for days. What kind of species did humanity want to be? The answer was suddenly clear. They wanted to be the kind of species that stood up when standing up was the hardest thing to do. The other delegates were beginning to gather their things, preparing to leave the negotiation room. Some were still crying, others were just staring into space. The weight of what they had done was beginning to sink in. They had just traded their children's freedom for their own survival. Vexthara was speaking to her own delegation, giving instructions about the next phase of the occupation. Her crystal body was still glowing with satisfaction. She had achieved something that no Zephyrian military commander had managed in 22 years of war. She had defeated humanity without firing a shot. Lisa felt herself moving, though she had not consciously decided to do so. Her body was rising from her chair, her legs straightening, her spine becoming rigid. She was standing up, and with that simple action everything changed. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, human and Zephyrian alike. She was not the tallest person in the room, nor the most imposing. But in that moment she represented something that both species recognized. She represented the spirit that had carried humanity. From the caves to the stars, the refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was inevitable. Captain Martinez, Admiral Parker said quietly, the vote has been taken. The decision has been made. Lisa looked at him, and for a moment she felt sorry for the older man. He had carried the burden of command through the darkest years of the war, and now he was being asked to carry the burden of surrender. But some burdens were too heavy for any one person to bear. The decision has been made, she agreed, but not by me. High Counselor Vexthara's crystal body shifted to a deep red color, indicating anger and confusion. The human delegation has spoken with one voice, she said. The matter is settled. Lisa turned to face the Zephyrian leader directly. The human delegation has spoken, she said. But I am not just a delegate, I am a human being. And human beings have the right to choose their own fate. The silence in the room was so complete that Lisa could hear her own heartbeat. She thought about all the times in human history when one person had stood up and said no to overwhelming power. She thought about the ripple effects of those moments, how they had changed the course of history in ways that no one could have predicted. "You speak only for yourself," Vexthara said. "Your species has already made its choice." Lisa smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That's where you're wrong," she said. "I speak for every human who ever refused to bow to tyranny. I speak for every person who chose to die free rather than live as a slave. I speak for the part of humanity that you will never understand and never defeat." She could feel the other delegates stirring behind her. Her words were having an effect, reminding them of things they had forgotten in their desperation to survive. She was reminding them that survival was not the only thing that mattered. "Your resistance is meaningless," Vexthara said. "Your species lacks the strength to oppose us." "You're right," Lisa said. "We're weaker than you. We're younger than you. We're less advanced than you, but we have something you don't have." "And what is that?" Lisa felt the weight of the moment, the knowledge that her next words would echo through history. "We have the ability to say no." The word hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between gods and mortals. Lisa stood in the center of the room, surrounded by beings who could destroy her with a thought, and she had just told them no. Not just for herself, but for her. Entire species. High Counselor Vexthara's crystal body was now pulsing with dark red energy, a sign of rage that Lisa had seen before in battle. "You dare to defy the will of the Empire? You dare to speak for your betters?" "I don't have betters," Lisa said simply. "I have equals and I have enemies. You are the latter." The other human delegates were stirring now, Lisa's words hitting them like electric shocks. Dr. Brooks was the first to react, slowly rising from her chair. Her face was wet with tears, but there was something new in her eyes, something that had been missing for days. "She's right," Dr. Brooks said, her voice stronger than it had been since the talks began. "We've been so focused on survival that we forgot what makes survival worthwhile." Colonel Johnson stood next, his military bearing returning as he straightened his shoulders. "I've buried too many good soldiers to let their sacrifice mean nothing," he said. "They died believing they were fighting for freedom. I won't dishonor their memory." One by one, the other delegates began to stand. Major Williams, her jaw set with determination. The civilian representatives, remembering their oaths to serve humanity's interests. Even some who had voted for acceptance were now rising, their faces showing the internal struggle between fear and pride. Admiral Parker remained seated, his head in his hands. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he asked. "You're condemning our species to extinction." Lisa turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. "No, Admiral. I'm giving our species the chance to remain human. There are worse things than death." "Like what?" "Like forgetting who we are." High Counselor Vexthara watched this display with growing fury. "This changes nothing," she declared. "Your delegation has already agreed to our terms. The will of the majority binds your entire species. Does it?" Lisa asked. She looked around the room at her fellow humans, all of them now standing except for Admiral Parker. "I don't think it does. I think each person gets to choose for themselves what kind of life they want to live." She turned back to face the Zephyrian. "Leader, you offered us survival in exchange for our freedom. We reject that offer, all of us." Admiral Parker finally stood, his movement slow and painful. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain Martinez is right. I let my fear cloud my judgment. I forgot that some things are more important than living another day." Vexthara's crystal body was now blazing with angry red light. "Then you have chosen extinction. Our fleets will destroy every human world, every human ship, every trace of your pathetic species." "Maybe," Lisa said, "but you'll have to fight for it. And that changes everything." The Zephyrian delegation began to leave, their crystal bodies radiating contempt and rage. But Lisa noticed something else: uncertainty. They had expected humanity to surrender gracefully, to accept their place as a subject species. The idea of continued resistance clearly bothered them. As the last Zephyrian left the room, Lisa felt a strange sense of peace. She had no idea what would happen next. The war would continue, probably with greater intensity than before. Humanity might indeed face extinction, but they would face it as free beings making their own choices about their destiny. Dr. Brooks approached her, still wiping tears from her eyes. "What happens now? Now we go home," Lisa said. "We warn our people about what's coming. We prepare for the final battle. And if we lose?" Lisa smiled, and this time it was a genuine expression of warmth. "Then we lose as humans. Free humans who chose to fight rather than surrender." The journey back to human space took 3 days. During that time, the delegates worked to prepare their report for Earth's leadership. They documented everything. They had learned about Zephyrian intentions and military preparations. They outlined the enemy's plans for the final assault, but most importantly, they told the story of their choice. They explained why they had rejected the Zephyrian terms. Despite the terrible cost that decision might bring, they wanted humanity to understand that the choice had been made freely, with full knowledge of the consequences. When they arrived at Earth, Lisa found herself facing a hero's welcome that she did not want. News of her stand at the peace talks had already spread throughout human space. People were calling her brave, calling her a symbol of human defiance. She found the attention uncomfortable and undeserved. "I just did what any human would do," she told the reporters who met her at the spaceport. "But you were the first to stand up," one journalist pointed out. "Someone had to be first," Lisa replied. "It might as well have been me." The war resumed, within days of the delegation's return. As predicted, the Zephyrian assault was massive and coordinated. They struck at key human worlds simultaneously, seeking to cripple humanity's ability to resist. But something had changed. The failed peace talks had united humanity in a way that 22 years of war had not. Every human colony, every ship, every individual knew what they were fighting for now. They were not just defending territory or resources. They were defending the right to be human, to make their own choices, to chart their own course among the stars. Lisa returned to the Valiant and found her crew ready for battle. Commander Roberts had used the time well, upgrading their weapons and preparing for the fight to come. The ship was as ready as human technology could make it. "Orders, Captain?" Roberts asked. "We fight," Lisa said simply. "We fight until we win, or until there's nothing left to fight with." The battle for humanity's future raged for 3 more years. It was a desperate struggle, with victories and defeats on both sides. But humanity had found something in themselves that they had almost lost at the peace talks. They had rediscovered their willingness to sacrifice everything for their principles. The turning point came when other species began to join the fight. The young Zephyrian that Lisa had met, Zexhai, had been busy spreading word of humanity's refusal to surrender. Other younger species in the galaxy began to see humans as symbols of resistance against ancient tyranny. Slowly, reluctantly, some of the older powers began to reconsider their positions. The galaxy had been stable for so long that many had forgotten what change looked like. Humanity reminded them that the universe was not fixed, that the future could be different from the past. The war ended not with humanity's victory, but with the Zephyrian Empire's collapse. Internal divisions, external pressure, and the simple exhaustion of fighting an enemy that refused to stay defeated finally broke the ancient power structure 10 years after the peace talks. Admiral Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching human ships patrol the borders of free space. The galaxy was a different place now, more chaotic but also more alive. Younger species were finding their voices, older powers were being forced to adapt. She thought often about that moment, in the conference room when she had stood up and said no. It had seemed like such a small action at the time, just one person making a choice. But she had learned that sometimes the smallest actions had the biggest consequences. Commander Roberts, now Captain Roberts of his own ship, sent her a message on the anniversary of the failed peace talks. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed in your chair?" he asked. Lisa considered the question for a long moment before replying. "No," she said. Because I know what would have happened. We would have survived, but we wouldn't have been human anymore. She looked out at the stars, at the vast expanse of space that humanity now called home. They had paid a terrible price for their freedom, but it had been worth it. They had proven that some things were indeed worth fighting for, that dignity was more important than safety, that the right to choose was the most precious gift any species could have. The peace discussions had ended when she stood up. But in ending, they had begun something else. They had begun humanity's true journey to the stars, not as subjects or survivors, but as free beings who refused to bow to anyone or anything. The stars looked different now. They looked like home.